I never should have come back to Romania. The thought echoed in my mind as I stared out the rain-streaked window of the rickety bus winding its way through the Carpathian foothills. Gnarled trees clawed at a leaden sky, their branches bare and accusing. We passed a crumbling Orthodox church, its weathered cross listing to one side, as if straining away from the encroaching forest. I shuddered and pulled my coat tighter around me. 20 years. That's how long it had been since I'd set foot in my homeland. 2 decades of building a new life in America, of trying to forget the horrors that had driven me away. But some tendrils of the past refused to be severed, no matter how far you run. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, bearing a familiar, slanted script I hadn't seen since childhood. My grandmother's handwriting is unmistakable even after all this time. Dragul meu nepot, it began. My dear grandson, you must return home at once. The old evil has awakened, and only you can put it to rest. Come quickly before it's too late. I had almost thrown the letter away, dismissing it as the ramblings of a senile older woman. But something in those words had stirred long-buried memories, raising the hairs on my neck. And so here I was, against my better judgment, heading back to the remote village of my youth. The bus wheezed to a stop at a decrepit station on the outskirts of town. I was the only passenger to disembark, earning a suspicious glare from the driver as I hefted my solitary bag. The station was deserted, save for an ancient ticket taker dozing in his booth. I stood for a moment, gathering my bearings. The village of Stramba Lemnă lay a few kilometers up the mountain road. In my youth, I would have made the trek on foot without a second thought, but years of city living softened me. I approached the ticket booth and rapped on the grimy glass. The older man's eyes snapped open, regarding me with undisguised hostility. "C'est vrai," he growled. "What do you want?" "I need a ride to Stramba Lemnă," I replied in Romanian, the words feeling strange on my tongue after so many years. "Is there a taxi service?" The ticket taker's roomy eyes narrowed. "Why would you want to go there, stranger? Nothing in Stramba Lemnă but ghosts and old bones." A chill ran down my spine. "I have family there," I said, trying to steady my voice. He snorted. "Not anymore, you don't, unless you count the dead." Before I could respond, he waved a gnarled hand. "Ionescu sometimes runs folks up the mountain in his truck, for a price." He jerked his chin toward a battered Dacia pickup idling near the station's single street lamp. I nodded my thanks and approached the vehicle. The driver, a swarthy man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, rolled down the window. "Stramba Lemnă?" I asked. He eyed me for a long moment, then nodded curtly. It was an outrageous price, but I could not argue. I climbed into the passenger seat, grimacing at the overwhelming stench of stale tobacco. We rode in silence as the truck labored up the winding mountain road. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches scraping against the sides of the vehicle like bony fingers. Darkness fell swiftly, and soon, the only illumination came from the truck's faltering headlights. I must have dozed off, for I was jolted awake when the truck suddenly stopped. We had reached the village outskirts. A weathered wooden sign proclaimed, "Stramba Lemnă," in faded letters. Beyond it, I could make out the dim shapes of scattered houses. "This is as far as I go," Ionescu grunted. "The rest of the way is on foot." I grabbed my bag and clambered out of the truck. Before I could thank him, Ionescu had thrown the vehicle into reverse. I watched the red taillights recede into the darkness, leaving me alone on the muddy road. The village was silent as a tomb. No lights shone in the windows, no smoke rose from the chimneys. Had the place been abandoned? But no. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I could make out subtle signs of habitation. A rusty bicycle is leaning against a fence, laundry hanging limply on a line. I made my way down the main street, my footsteps echoing hollowly. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I had the distinct sensation of being watched, though I could see no one. At last, I reached my destination, my grandmother's cottage on the village outskirts. It looked much as I remembered, though smaller somehow. The thatched roof sagged alarmingly, and weeds choked the tiny front garden. I raised my hand to knock, but the door swung open at my touch with a mournful creak. "Bunica?" I called softly. "Grandmother?" No answer came from the darkened interior. I fumbled for the light switch, but nothing happened when I flicked it. The power must be out. Cursing under my breath, I dug a small flashlight from my bag. Its beam cut through the gloom, revealing a scene of disarray. Furniture was overturned, and papers were scattered across the floor, signs of a struggle or a hasty departure. My pulse quickened as I moved deeper into the house. "Bunica?" I called again, louder this time. Still no response. I pushed open the door to her bedroom, dreading what I might find. The beam of my flashlight fell upon the bed. Empty, the covers were thrown back, but a dark stain marred the white sheets. With trembling fingers, I reached out to touch it. The stain was tacky and not thoroughly dried. Blood. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled, my heart hammering in my chest. For an instant, I glimpsed a figure silhouetted in the doorway, tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers in the darkness. Then my flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute blackness. I heard the rasp of labored breathing, moving closer. Icy fingers brushed against my cheek. A voice spoke directly into my ear, dry as autumn leaves. "Welcome home, nephew. We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. My back hit the wall, and I fumbled desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. I realized my hand closed around something cold and metallic, an old candlestick. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice embarrassingly shrill. "What have you done with my grandmother?" A low chuckle emanated from the darkness, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You know who I am, Mihai. You've always known. Why else would you have run so far, for so long?" The voice was familiar, dredging up memories I'd spent years trying to bury. It couldn't be. He was dead. I'd seen him die. "Uncle Vasile?" I whispered. Another chuckle, closer now. "The very same, though I'm not quite the man you remember." A match flared to life, illuminating a face I hadn't seen in 2 decades. It was my uncle's face, and yet, not. The features were sharper, more predatory. The skin was waxy and pale, pulled tight over prominent cheekbones. And the eyes, God, the eyes. They glowed with an unholy red light, like embers in a dying fire. Vasile lit a candle on the bedside table, casting the room in flickering shadows. He smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. What are you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The old stories my grandmother had told me as a child came rushing back, tales I'd dismissed as superstition and folklore. "I think you know, nephew," Vasile said, stepping closer. "Say it. Give it a name." I swallowed hard. "Strigoi." Vasile's smile widened. "Very good. You haven't forgotten everything, it seems." My mind raced. Strigoi, the undead of Romanian legend. Restless spirits that rose from the grave to torment the living. Vampiric creatures that fed on the blood and life essence of their victims. "This is impossible," I said, shaking my head. "You died. There was a funeral." "Death, as it turns out, is not quite as permanent as we once believed," Vasile replied. He began to pace the small room, his movements unnaturally fluid. "But you're right. I did die. Murdered. By your grandmother." I blinked in surprise. "What? No, that can't be true. Bunica would never—" "Oh, but she did," Vasile interrupted. "She knew what I was becoming. What our entire bloodline is cursed to become sooner or later. She thought she could break the cycle by killing me before the change was complete." He laughed bitterly. She was wrong. My head spun as I tried to process this information. A family curse? Is that why my parents were so insistent that we left Romania all those years ago? "Where is she?" I demanded. "What have you done with her?" Vasile's eyes glittered in the candlelight. "Your grandmother is alive for now, but her time grows short. You see, Mihai, I've been waiting for you." waiting for the prodigal son to return home. Why? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Because you're the key, Vasile said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The last of our bloodline. With your help, I can complete the ritual that will make me truly immortal, and in return, I'll grant you power beyond your wildest dreams. I gripped the candlestick tighter, my palms slick with sweat. And if I refuse? Vasile's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. Then your grandmother dies, slowly and painfully, and you'll join her soon after. Make no mistake, nephew. You have no choice in this matter. The only question is how much suffering you will endure before you submit to your destiny. With inhuman speed, Vasile closed the distance between us. His cold hand wrapped around my throat, lifting me off my feet with impossible strength. I gasped for air, black spots dancing at the edges of my vision. You have until sunrise to decide, Vasile hissed. Meet me at the old church on the hill. Come alone, or the old woman dies. He released me and I crumpled to the floor, gasping. When I looked up, Vasile was gone. The candle guttered out, plunging the room into darkness once more. I don't know how long I sat there, trembling in the dark. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Part of me wanted to believe it was all a nightmare, that I'd wake up back in my apartment in New York. But the throbbing in my throat and the lingering scent of decay in the air told me this was all too real. Eventually, I gathered myself enough to stumble out of the house. The village was still eerily quiet, but now I could feel eyes watching me from shadowed windows. The villagers knew. They had always known. I went to the village square, where an ancient well stood. My grandmother once told me that the well was older than the village, reaching into hidden caverns deep beneath the mountains. As a child, I'd been fascinated by the well. I'd spend hours dropping pebbles into its depths, waiting for the faint splash that sometimes never came. Now, as I approached it, I felt only dread. I peered into the inky blackness, wondering how deep it indeed went. For a moment, I considered jumping in. Surely a quick death would be preferable to whatever horrors awaited me at sunrise. I wouldn't do that if I were you, a voice said behind me. I whirled around to find an older woman watching me. She was ancient, her face full of wrinkles, yet her eyes were sharp and alert. Who are you? I asked. A friend of your grandmother's, she replied. My name is Ileana. I've been waiting for you, Mihai. I tensed, remembering Vasile's supernatural speed. Are you like him? Ileana shook her head. No, child. I'm something far older, something the Strigoi fear. She reached into her shawl and produced a small cloth bag. Your grandmother asked me to give you this if she couldn't do it herself. I took the bag cautiously. Inside, I found a silver crucifix, a vial of what looked like water, and a folded piece of paper. What is all this? I asked. Tools, Ileana replied, and knowledge. The paper contains a ritual, one that can destroy a Strigoi forever, but it comes at a great cost. I unfolded the paper, squinting to read the faded handwriting in the dim light. My blood ran cold as I realized what it described. This is, I began. A blood sacrifice, Ileana finished for me. Yes. The only way to truly end a Strigoi is with the willing sacrifice of one of its bloodlines. I looked up at her, horrified. You're saying that to kill Vasile, either my grandmother or I have to die? Ileana nodded solemnly. That is the choice before you, Mihai. Sacrifice yourself to destroy the evil that plagues your family, or join it and become a monster yourself. I stared at the items in my hand, the weight of the decision crushing down on me. The horizon was already beginning to lighten. Dawn was approaching. What should I do? I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. Ileana's expression softened. I cannot make that choice for you, child. But know this. Whatever you decide must be done with a true and willing heart. Hesitation or doubt will doom us all. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Mihai. Remember, A Strigoi's greatest weapon is not its strength or speed, but its ability to twist the truth. Do not believe everything you see or hear. With that cryptic warning, she melted into the shadows, leaving me alone with my terrible choice. I looked toward the hill where the old church stood silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Somewhere up there, my uncle. No. The thing that had once been my uncle was waiting. And with him, my grandmother's fate hung in the balance. Taking a deep breath, I pocketed the items Ileana had given me and began walking up the hill. With each step, I felt the weight of my family's cursed legacy bearing down on me. When I reached the church, the eastern sky was streaked with pink and gold. I paused at the entrance, my hand on the ancient wooden door. Whatever lay on the other side would change my life forever, if it didn't end it altogether. Steeling myself, I pushed open the door and stepped into the shadowy interior, ready to face my destiny. The interior of the church was bathed in an unholy red glow. Dozens of black candles lined the walls, their flames casting writhing shadows across the crumbling frescoes. The air was thick with the cloying scent of incense and something darker, the metallic tang of fresh blood. At the altar stood Vasile, his back to me. He was hunched over something. No, someone. With a jolt of horror, I recognized my grandmother's frail form sprawled across the stone. "Bunica!" I cried out, rushing forward. Vasile turned, his face streaked with blood. He smiled, revealing fangs stained crimson. "Ah, nephew, right on time." I skidded to a halt, my hand instinctively reaching the crucifix in my pocket. "Let her go," I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Vasile tisked, wagging a finger at me. Now. You're in no position to make demands." He gestured to my grandmother. "She lives for the moment. Whether she continues to do so depends entirely on you." I looked at my grandmother. Her eyes were open, filled with a mixture of pain and... was that shame? "Mihai," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to bear this burden." "Quiet, old woman," Vasile snapped. He turned his burning gaze back to me. "It's time to choose, Mihai. Join me. Embrace the power that runs in your veins. Together, we can rule over this miserable village, this entire country, if we desire." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "And if I refuse?" Vasile's eyes narrowed. "Then the old woman dies, and you'll join her soon after. Make no mistake, nephew. There is no escaping your destiny. The only choice is to meet it with open arms or kick and scream." My hand tightened around the crucifix in my pocket. I could feel the vial of holy water pressing against my leg, the weight of the ritual paper like a burning coal. I had the tools to end this, but at what cost? "Why me?" I asked, stalling for time. "Why am I so important to this ritual of yours?" Vasile smiled, clearly enjoying the chance to boast. "Our bloodline is ancient, Mihai. We descend from the first Strigoi, creatures of immense power. But over the centuries, that power has been diluted, weakened by intermarriage with humans." He spat the last word like a curse. "You and I, we are the last of the pure bloodline. I can restore our family to its former glory with your willing sacrifice." "You're insane," I said, shaking my head. "This is madness." "Is it?" Vasile countered. "Look around you, Mihai. Look at the world we live in, full of pain, suffering, and death. As Strigoi, we would be above all that, immortal, invincible." For a moment, God help me, I was tempted. The power he offered was seductive, promising an escape from the fear and uncertainty that had plagued me all my life. But then, I looked at my grandmother, saw the pain and desperation in her eyes, and I knew I couldn't do it. Whatever the cost, I had to end this curse once and for all. I squared my shoulders, meeting Vasile's gaze. "No," I said firmly. "I won't help you. This ends now." Vasile's face contorted with rage. "Fool!" he snarled. "You would throw away everything for what? Some misguided sense of morality?" He grabbed my grandmother by the hair, yanking her head back to expose her throat. "Last chance, nephew. Join me, or watch her die." Time seemed to slow. I saw Vasilei's fangs descending toward my grandmother's neck. I saw her close her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek, and I knew what I had to do. In one fluid motion, I pulled out the crucifix and vial of holy water. "Hey, uncle," I called out. As Vasilei looked up, I hurled the vial at his face. It shattered against his forehead, the blessed water sizzling on contact with his unholy flesh. Vasilei shrieked, releasing my grandmother as he clawed at his smoking skin. I rushed forward, brandishing the crucifix. "Back!" I shouted. "In the name of God, I command you to release her." To my amazement, it worked. Vasilei recoiled from the silver cross, hissing like a wounded animal. I helped my grandmother to her feet, keeping the crucifix between us and the monster that had once been my uncle. "Run," I told her, pressing the crucifix into her hand. "Get out of here. I'll hold him off." She gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Mihai, no, you don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," I replied, meeting her gaze. "And I know what needs to be done. Now go." Reluctantly, she hobbled toward the church entrance, holding the crucifix before her like a shield. Vasilei made no move to stop her, his burning eyes fixed solely on me. "You disappoint me, nephew," he growled, his face already beginning to heal from the holy water. "I offered you godhood, and you throw it away for what? To save one miserable old woman?" I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to run. "Not just her," I said. "To save everyone you would harm. To end this curse once and for all." Vasilei laughed, a chilling sound devoid of any human warmth. "End it? You fool. The curse is in your blood. It's what you are. You can no more end it than you can change the color of your eyes or the shape of your bones." "Maybe not," I conceded. "But I can stop you from hurting anyone else." I pulled out the paper Ileana had given me, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. Vasilei's eyes widened as he recognized the text. "No," he breathed. "You wouldn't dare." But I would. I had to. I began to recite the ritual, my voice growing stronger with each word. The candles flickered wildly, and wind from nowhere began to howl through the church. Vasilei lunged at me, his face twisted into an inhuman snarl. But some unseen force held him back, leaving him thrashing midair like a puppet on invisible strings. "Stop!" he shrieked. "You don't know what you're doing! The price—" "I know the price," I said grimly, continuing the magic. My skin began to tingle, then burn. I could feel something being pulled out of me. My life force, my essence. Vasilei's form began to waver, becoming insubstantial. "Please," he begged, his voice fading. "We're family." I faltered for a moment, doubt creeping in. But then I remembered all the people he had hurt, all the lives he would destroy if I failed. I steeled myself and spoke the final words of the ritual. A blinding light filled the church. I felt as if I were being torn apart from the inside out. Vasilei's agonized scream mingled with my own as the magic took hold. And then, mercifully, darkness claimed me. I awoke to the sound of birdsong. Slowly, painfully, I opened my eyes. I was lying on a bed of soft grass, the morning sun warm on my face. Above me, tree branches swayed gently in the breeze. "Welcome back," a familiar voice said. I turned to see Ileana sitting beside me, her weathered face creased with concern. What happened?" I croaked, my throat painfully dry. "You did it," she said simply. "The Strigoi is gone. The curse is broken." Memory came flooding back. The ritual, the searing pain, Vasilei's final scream. I tried to sit up, but found I barely had the strength to lift my head. "Easy," Ileana cautioned, placing a gnarled hand on my shoulder. "The ritual took a great deal from you. It will take time to recover." I licked my dry lips. "My grandmother. She lives," Ileana assured me. "She's resting now. You both have a long road ahead, but you're free of the curse that has plagued your family for generations." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a wave of exhaustion. As my eyes began to close, a thought occurred to me. "Ileana," I murmured. "The ritual. It was supposed to require a sacrifice. How did I survive?" The older woman was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with something like regret. The ritual required the willing sacrifice of a life. It never specified that it had to be a death. I frowned, not understanding, but I was too tired to press further. As I drifted back into unconsciousness, I heard Ileana's voice, soft and sad. "Rest now, child. Your new life awaits." The following days passed in a haze of fevered dreams and fragmented consciousness. I drifted in and out of awareness, catching snippets of hushed conversations and feeling cool clothes pressed to my forehead. Through it all, a bone-deep weariness clung to me as if some vital part of my being had been hollowed out. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself in my grandmother's cottage, tucked into the bed I'd slept in as a child. Weak sunlight filtered through the faded curtains, and the air smelled of herbs and wood smoke. I tried to sit up, my muscles protesting with every movement. A hand gently pressed me back down. "Easy, drag me," my grandmother's voice soothed. "You're still recovering." I turned to see her sitting beside the bed, looking older and more frail than I remembered, but very much alive. Relief flooded through me. "Bunica," I whispered, my voice hoarse from disuse. "You're okay." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks to you, my brave boy." She took my hand in hers, and I was struck by how cold her skin felt. Or was I unnaturally warm? "How long?" I asked. 3 weeks, she replied. "We weren't sure you'd wake up at all." 3 weeks. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd lost nearly a month of my life. What about my job back in New York? My apartment? My entire life that I'd left behind? As if reading my thoughts, my grandmother squeezed my hand. "Don't worry about any of that now. You need to focus on getting your strength back." I nodded, too tired to argue. But as I settled back against the pillows, a nagging question surfaced. "Bunica," I said hesitantly, "what exactly happened in that church? The ritual? Ileana said something about a sacrifice, but I don't understand." My grandmother's face fell, and for a moment, she looked every one of her years. "Oh, Mihai," she sighed. "I had hoped to spare you from this burden, but I suppose you have a right to know." She stood up slowly, joints creaking, and moved to the window. She stared at the village for a long moment, lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with regret. "The ritual you performed," she began, "required the willing sacrifice of a life. But as Ileana told you, it never specified that it had to be a death." She turned back to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You gave up a part of yourself, Mihai, a part of your life force, your very essence." I frowned, trying to process this. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," she said softly, "that while you destroyed the curse and saved us all, you paid a terrible price. Your life, it will be shortened. By how much, we can't be sure. But you will never again have the vitality you once did. In a way, you're like a candle that's been burnt at both ends." The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. I had known, on some level, that there would be consequences. But the reality, the idea that I had sacrificed years of my life, decades perhaps, was almost too much to bear. "I'm so sorry, my dear," my grandmother continued, returning to the bedside. "If I had been stronger, if I had dealt with Vasile years ago as I should have—" "No," I interrupted, finding strength I didn't know I had. I reached out and took her hand. "You have nothing to apologize for. I made my choice, and I would make it again." She smiled tremulously, bringing my hand to her lips and kissing it. "You always were the best of us," she murmured. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, I voiced the question that had been nagging at me. "What happens now?" My grandmother straightened, a determined look crossing her face. "Now, you rest and regain your strength. And then, we make the most of the time you have left." Over the following weeks, as my strength slowly returned, I learned more about what had transpired. The village of Stramba Lemnă, extended living under the shadow of the Strigoi curse, began to come back to life. People emerged from their homes, children played in the streets again, and there was talk of holding the first community festival in years. I made the difficult calls back to New York, explaining as best I could why I wouldn't be returning. It wasn't easy to leave that life behind, but I knew I couldn't return to how things were. Not now that I understood the truth about my family's legacy, and the sacrifice I had made to end it. Instead, I threw myself into helping rebuild the village. We restored the old church, transforming it from a place of dark rituals to a true sanctuary. I spent long hours with my grandmother, recording the true history of our family and the knowledge she had accumulated over her long life. And in the quiet moments, usually as twilight painted the Carpathian foothills in shades of purple and gold, I would sit with Ileana. The older woman never quite explained what she was, or how she knew so much about the supernatural world. But she taught me about the hidden forces that shape our world, and how to recognize the signs of other dark entities that might threaten the peace we had so dearly bought. As the seasons turned and years passed, I felt the truth of my grandmother's words. I tired more quickly than I should, and the gray in my hair came far too soon. But there was peace in knowing that I had made a difference, that the evil that had plagued my family for generations was finally ending. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat on the cottage's porch that had become my home, I saw a young couple walking down the village street. The woman was visibly pregnant, and both were laughing, carefree in a way that would have been unthinkable in the old days. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the tea I was drinking. Yes, my life would be shorter than it might have been, but seeing the joy and life returning to Stramba Lemnă, I knew that it had been worth it. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and pink. As darkness fell, I lit a candle and placed it in the window, not as a ward against evil this time, but as a beacon of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest of nights, a single light can make all the difference. And as I settled in for the night, I felt not fear, but a profound sense of peace. Whatever the future might hold, I was ready to face it. For I had confronted the darkest parts of my heritage and emerged victorious. The whispers in the dark no longer held any power over me. I was Mihai, the one who broke the curse. And that, I decided, was a legacy I could live with, however long or short that life might be. Comment below and share your scary encounters. Also, consider joining the Fear Frequencies community for exclusive perks and early access to new content. Your support helps us create even more thrilling stories. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider leaving a super thanks.